We'll be in Matthew chapter 20 if you want to turn there in your Bibles. It will or should be a familiar passage to those of you who are on our church Bible reading schedule. You will have just read that yesterday, actually. So if some of this material is familiar, that's the reason why. I'm wondering how Pastor Joel is going to do when that carne asada smell is creeping into the auditorium during the morning service. He's going to have to try especially hard to keep your attention during that morning service time, but it's all good. We're so excited for Luke and Sharon. We as a family all rejoice in the new arrival in our family. That's 11 grandchildren for my wife and I now. And it just seems like a few years ago, I was in this very pulpit trying to guilt my children into having some kids so I could be a grandfather. And here we are. You blink a couple times and there's 11 of them. So my wife on the way to church today on our commute, she asked Katie to send her a picture. She called it, I guess, she's next door, a church picture where the kids are dressed up. Katie, my daughter Katie and Josh, just had a baby a short time ago. So they have a little infant as well. And Chloe she's quite a firecracker. And so she sent us a picture of them, and we're just rejoicing with all these wonderful lives and the potential that God has to use them for His purposes in the future. And you keep all of them in your prayers if you would. Matthew chapter 20. We're going to look at as we're finishing up this series, the New Testament personalities, the life of a brother, one of the disciples who was a brother. His name is James. So we're actually going to read a little bit in a few minutes another passage, a parallel passage. But this one I like because it introduces to us a feature that's a little convicting to us as parents in terms of how we perceive our children, the expectations from what our kids end up doing and being, and also the role that we have in shaping them and steering them in the right direction. I think, to quote a very familiar statement that Pastor Joel always makes. He says, there's ditches on both sides. And sometimes we try too little to challenge our children. We don't challenge them enough. And sometimes we try too much to put them into our box, is what we think about their future. And maybe we've done both with the same children. But let's look at this interesting passage. This one is a little more obscure in regard to the fact that it involves the introduction of some information about Mrs. Zebedee. I don't know what her name was, but his name, the father's name was Zebedee, so it's his wife, and she's part of this passage in Matthew 20. Look at verse number 20. Then came to him the mother of Zebedee's children with her sons. Interesting that they wouldn't give her name. They were her children as well, worshiping him and desiring a certain thing of him. And he said unto her, What wilt thou? Jesus said that. She saith unto him, Grant that these my two sons may sit, the one on thy right hand and the other on the left in thy kingdom. But Jesus answered and said, Ye know not what ye ask. Are ye able to drink of the cup that I drink of, and to be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They say unto him, We are able. And he saith unto them, Ye shall drink indeed of my cup, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it shall be given to them for whom it was prepared of my Father. Then when the 10 heard it, they were moved with indignation against the two brethren. All of the apostles, of course, had mothers, right? We all have a mother. Some people don't know their fathers, but we all have a mother. And the mothers played different roles in their lives. Probably a lot of their work was done by the time Jesus called these apostles to be a part of the ministry, to be special, play a special role in promoting the gospel. We know that James and John, the two brothers, had a father whose name is given, and a little bit of information is given about this father, Zebedee. We know that he was not only probably a fisherman, just like James and John, but he probably headed the business, and it was a family business. So there's some information about him that we can glean from. When the Lord called James and John to follow him, they were with their father out fishing during that day, that special day when they were called. But we don't often get a glimpse into the lives of the mothers of the apostle. Here's one rare exception where we have that here, where their mother is mentioned. Now, I don't know, just it's perhaps wrong for us to develop a whole personality profile on someone with just such a short passage of Scripture, but I don't know if we can say for sure what she was like. But her bringing her sons in this setting and asking what she did was a little out of the ordinary. Maybe she was just very engaged. Mothers are like that sometimes, especially when you have a passive father who just kind of does his thing and provides for his family. But mothers are all, zeroed in on what their children become and what their children do. She might have had that kind of a personality. Sometimes parents try to channel their ambitions through their children. Things that interest them or things that they wanted to do or become, whether they were able to accomplish those goals or not, they then have children and they think, now my role is to try to get my children to do just like I wanted to do or what I was not able to do. We see that happen sometimes. And perhaps she was looking for a little recognition herself. If her sons were the vice president and executive vice president of the organization of the kingdom, that would put her in a good light as well. There are some sad stories about parents who have done that to their children and had these high expectations and allowed their children to grow up with these very stringent requirements, and we as parents sometimes push our children a little too far in that area. When I was reviewing for this message, I thought of someone that fit into that category. Now, I know Jim Taylor will know this guy. I don't know how many of you would know. If I say the name Todd Marinovich, how many of you know who that person is? Oh, yeah, Richard, I should have known you would know. You're a Southern California boy, Brother Steve. Todd Marinovich was his father, I should say, was a professional football player. And he played in the NFL. And he enjoyed some measure of success, but he wasn't a star player by any means. He wasn't a Hall of Famer. And after he retired from being a player, he became a strength and conditioning coach. And that combination of things in his life, his father's name, by the way, was, let's see, I have it written down somewhere here. I didn't even know his father's name, but his father, here it is, Marv Marinovich, trained his son from infancy to be not only to be a star athlete or to be a professional athlete. He trained his son from infancy to be the best athlete the world has ever seen. That was his goal for his son. Now that's a pretty big bill to fill. I want to raise my son to be the best athlete that's ever lived, and he was very disciplined in his approach to his son. From the time he was a baby, he was on supplements, a specific diet. From the time he was a little toddler, he was doing exercises, religiously to train him to be this star athlete. They called him there was a nickname given him. He was called the Robo quarterback. As if to say he wasn't even human. The things that his father was doing with all these supplements and these new exercise procedures and regimens and teaching him skills at a young age, he literally made that his goal in life with young Todd. Well, no surprise to us with that kind of effort, Todd became a star quarterback. First in high school, he was drafted or he was recruited by USC. That's why Brother Richard probably knew about him from that neck of the woods. He played quarterback for USC and was a very good quarterback. In fact, even in his high school days, he was on the front cover of Sports Illustrated. For those of you who follow sports, to end up on the cover of a Sports Illustrated edition is a big deal. He was there as a high school player. And although these training techniques and everything all seem to be falling into place for Marv, he's getting his son was going to be the best athlete. He was recruited. He played in and won a Rose Bowl as a college football player for USC. in his first year, his freshman year of college. And he was a first-round draft pick. And he made it into the NFL. And what team did he play for, Richard? Who? Yeah. He played for the Raiders. And, I remember back during that period, I followed the Raiders a little bit and remember this young quarterback coming in there and playing right away, and everybody thought he was going to be the greatest thing in professional football. But there were things about the foundation of his life that started to show a sort of a crack in the foundation. One of them was he was doing everything for his dad, and not because he necessarily enjoyed it. He would later say that his upbringing was described as performance-based love. So as long as he was acquiring these skills and getting these awards and following this path that his father had laid out for his life, he felt that he experienced the love and support of his father. But when he began to struggle a little bit, that turned south and things began to deteriorate in his relationship with his father. Well, this all came crashing in. When you're raised like that in that environment for all those years, you just do what's expected and you keep trying to do what's expected, and then the goals are made higher and further to reach, and he kept trying for those. But at some point, you're going to reach a stage where you can't do everything your father wants you to do or be everything your father wants you to be. And he struggled a little bit in professional football. He was an exceptionally large man for a football player, and he started having some minor injuries and so forth. And anyway, his father expected so much out of him. He felt that when he was not doing everything he should, his father was not accepting and loving him unconditionally. And so a young man who's enjoyed a measure of success now has been given millions of dollars to play in the NFL. What often happens in a situation like that? You can almost, only a few of you knew who he was, but you can almost expect what would happen in this progression of life as he was starting to struggle and not become the Super Bowl champion to lead his team to the success. Depression, and what would that lead to?
Some kind of abuse.
Substance abuse, yeah. And then one thing went to another. Pretty soon he's addicted to heroin. And he drank and he did all the nightlife and all the fame and popularity caused him to pursue all the wrong things in life. He was breaking free from his father's control, and that, of course, springboarded him to do the opposite of what his father expected. He abandoned that diet, his strict diet. This is a young man that up to the time he was drafted by USC in college had never enjoyed a candy bar. That's unchristian. There's something unchristian about that. We give candy bars to fathers on Father's Day around here, I mean, can you imagine going through the line there and saying, there's nothing there I can eat because it's, the beef wasn't made, or the sugar in the desserts, just the strict diet. And so when you break free from something like that, you often find yourself with the pendulum effect going way over on this side. And he began to hang out, doing the nightlife and drinking alcohol and then experimenting with drugs, and he became addicted to drugs. That, of course, affected his performance, and it's no surprise to any of us, his career was very short-lived. If I would have named any number of Hall of Fame quarterbacks, even if you don't follow football, he goes, I've heard of Bart Starr, or I've heard of Johnny Unitas, or I've heard of whoever it is. But only a couple of you even knew who Todd Marinovich was because his career was so short. And all of this came about because his father wanted to relive his life through his son. Now, I don't know that we can be this hard on Zebedee's wife. I don't know whether she was ambitious or whether she had these expectations or whether she thought if her two sons are given high places of leadership in this coming kingdom, she was completely off base in what she expected in a coming kingdom. Maybe she thought she would be in a political role in the nation. That was not uncommon during that day. Just look at the lives of the Herods and their wives, sometimes their daughters, those stories in the Bible. I don't know what she expected, but she came bringing her sons to the Lord. and asking for this special privilege. And there must be something said for James, because Jesus himself gave James and his brother a nickname. What did he call them? Yeah, sons of thunder. So we're going to look at those. We're going to look at these examples today of what happened in their lives. So that first key, let me give you a little background. James was the older of the two brothers, and John, of course, was his brother. And when you look at the life of John, and we will consider John next week, I believe, if not next week, the week following. When you look at their lives, there seems to be a divergence in their personalities and their roles among the disciples. But James seemed to be the one who was especially interesting in his personality. And Jesus himself gave him this nickname of Son of Thunder. Now, I want you to look at a parallel passage in Luke chapter 9. In that particular passage, we don't have a reference to their mother coming. Luke decided not to include those details that the mother came along with James and John to be asking for this special privilege. But we do have some other information that's worth looking at. So let's turn to Luke chapter 9 and look at verse 51. It came to pass when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. Oh, I'm sorry. This is another passage I want to give you. We want to explain why Jesus named James the son of thunder. This is another rare passage with something that happened that tells you a little bit about his personality. So he sent messengers before his face. They went and entered into a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. Now, when I read that, you're already like a little bit on edge. Okay, the Samaritans, we know about the Samaritans. We know that the relationship between the Jews and the Samaritans was not good. We know how the Samaritan people and that race of people came about. They intermarried, the Jews intermarried with pagan people, and they were not pure Jews, and the Jews looked down upon them and despised them, and the Samaritans returned the favor. They didn't appreciate the fact that they were not looked upon and treated with respect. And so there's tension between those two groups. These Jewish apostles who came in to make ready for Jesus' visit there. And it should be no surprise in verse 53 that they did not receive him because his face was though he would go to Jerusalem. For that reason alone, they said, no, we're not going to allow you to come here and stay here and make provision for you. You're not going to be our guest here. For no other reason than, Jesus, you're determined to go to Jerusalem. And we don't have any dealings with those two groups of people. There was religious and cultural and racial bigotry between those groups. They did not get along. So when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they saw it. Look what they said. Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elias did? Now, that's a little overkill, isn't it? I mean, Jesus was on the cross, and he could have called legions of angels to come rescue him and relieve him, or completely wipe out those who were crucifying him. And we might feel that's justified. But they're saying just because the Samaritans would not allow them to come and spend the night and have lodging and provisions there, James and John came up with this great idea. Why don't we do like Elias or Elijah did and command fire to come down from heaven and just toast them? Now you know why Sons of Thunder, maybe perhaps how they got that designation. I don't know what you would have done or said in that situation. But Jesus turned and rebuked them and said, you know not what manner of spirit ye are of. For the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And they went to another village, rather than going through the region of the Samaritans. Now, I wish we'd had a little more glimpse into that. I wanted to know how James responded to that rebuke. Whether he was like, you're right, Lord. That's a wrong spirit for us to want to have fire come down and consume these people just because they won't welcome us into their city. Or maybe he complied and thought, maybe under his breath grumbled that something was not done. I just want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself what you might have done in that situation. Now they're at the tail end of their ministry, judging from verse number 51. He was now at the tail end of his ministry. They had been with Jesus for a long time. They had seen the miracles. They had witnessed some perhaps surprising actions on the part of the Lord Jesus Christ. Two that come to mind right now are the cursing of the fig tree. It had nothing for them to eat, and Jesus cursed that fig tree and it never produced again. Or how about turning over the tables of the money changers? Jesus had demonstrated that side to his personality and will. Maybe they thought they were justified in asking Jesus to, let's just rain down fire upon these people. But they were mistaken in their attitude here, and Jesus rebuked them. And I wondered if we were given a glimpse into his heart, whether James felt convicted about what he asked, or perhaps a little bit regretful that Jesus didn't allow them to bring fire down and rain it upon the people in that area. But that's where we understand him to have that nickname, Son of Thunder. But I want you to see, secondly, going back to our text passage, a seminar on greatness. A seminar on greatness. And that's where I want you to turn to the parallel passage. It's in Mark chapter 10, if you would turn there. That's the one that doesn't include their mother's involvement in this particular setting. I have no doubt that she was a part of that because we read it in Matthew's account, but for some reason Mark decided to leave out the details of their mother. But it brings out another interesting point here. So in Mark chapter 10, look at verse number 35. It says, And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came unto him, saying, Master, we would that thou shouldest do for us whatsoever we shall desire. And he said unto them, What would that I should do for you? And they said unto him, Grant unto us that we may sit one on the right hand and the other on thy left hand in thy glory. I want you to focus on Jesus' reply to that request in verse number 38. Jesus said unto them, Ye know not what ye ask. Can ye drink of the cup that I drink of, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And they said unto him, We can. Well, it's obvious to us that they didn't understand what he was saying here. I mean, they're wanting to sign up to be executive officers in this new organization, this new kingdom that's coming into play. And when he talked about drinking of the cup and experiencing the same thing he had not yet been betrayed. They wanted to be on his right hand and on his left hand in the kingdom. Well, they weren't exactly on his right hand or his left hand when he was betrayed, when he was arrested, when he was brutally beaten, when he was mocked, when he was crucified. They didn't want anything to do with that. So how do we know that? Because they were strangely absent when all those events were taking place in the life of Jesus Christ. They didn't then understand exactly what Jesus was saying to them, and probably would want nothing to do with that. None of us would want anything to do with that. But that's what Jesus meant when he spoke about this cup. It was a cup of suffering. It was a cup of agony. A cup of, it's not too strong a term to use the word torture and hardship. It was a cup of death. And lest we're too hard on these two brothers who came to Jesus asking that, I don't know if when they came to Jesus, that the other disciples were in close proximity, whether they were in listening distance to hear that request, but we do know that they did get word of it, because it says in verse 41, when the 10 heard it, the other 10 apostles, they began to be much displeased with James and John. So you can question their character and criticize them for wanting to have a special place of prominence in the Lord's kingdom. But I want you to just be honest with the fact that all of the apostles, the other apostles, were resentful that they came and asked for that. You know, it would indicate to us that they wanted that position of authority too, or responsibility as well. How often have we been guilty of asking the Lord for things that we really don't know what we're asking, and in the long run we probably wouldn't want if the Lord gave it to us? Can you imagine what a mess our lives would be in if the Lord granted every request that we brought to him? I mean, there are multiple examples in the Bible alone about people who asked that the Lord would take their lives. And I'm sure they were very grateful, very grateful that the Lord didn't answer that request. And there are things we've asked for that we probably did not need or should not have. And certainly in this situation, they didn't know what they were asking for. At the heart of it was, self-edification, self-promotion. And on the part of the other disciples, there was jealousy about that. And none of them really knew what they were asking for. But the beautiful thing about this is that they were given that cup later on. What changed these two brothers, and particularly James? What changed James to make him later on willing to receive that cup? It's the example of the Lord Jesus Christ himself. He saw his life, they witnessed his death, and he encouraged them to ultimately take that position of suffering themselves. And in doing so, he was teaching them what true greatness is. True greatness is not how many people cater to us or serve us. That's not what greatness. Jesus says true greatness is measured in how many people you serve. The more people you serve in your life, the greater you are in the eyes of Jesus Christ. The more people that you prefer or put above you, the greater person you are. And that runs in direct opposition to what the world says. The world says exactly the opposite. The more people you have that answer to you or obey you or cater to your needs and wants, the more important you are. But Jesus said it's the exact opposite for his children. And people should learn that lesson early on and find opportunities to minister to other people whenever you can. Jesus tried to teach James that initially looking at the world's model of success would not get him anywhere. But he said, whoever humbles himself shall be what? Exalted. Yeah, he'll be exalted. He'll be lifted up. In the long run, that's exactly what we need to do. So we see the Son of Thunder, we see the seminar on greatness, and then finally his sacrificial death. A sacrificial death. Now, in the case of many of the disciples, the end result of their lives and what would ultimately happen is not recorded for us in Scripture. And we've drawn upon church tradition or history from outside sources, from secular sources, to try to fill in those gaps. I've tried the best I can to at least share the options, what history records as the final demise of these apostles. We know that Judas took his own life. We know that John was exiled to the island of Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation. So he appears to have died of natural causes. At the very least, he lived a longer life. But outside of Judas and John, the apostles all died, is believed, and some of these events are recorded for us, it's believed that they died martyrs' deaths. They did drink of that cup and experience the same thing that Jesus said they would. But in the case of James, and specifically, we are not left to wonder or to rely upon church history or tradition to tell us how James died. We know how James died. It's recorded for us in the book of Acts. So turn with me to Acts chapter 12, and we'll finish up on the last point, his sacrificial death. I wish I had time to go back into it. Remember we talked about all the common names. There's multiple Jameses, multiple Johns, multiple Elizabeths, multiple Marys in the Bible. And when I shared some of those things in previous lessons, I hope you all took copious notes and you have all these people figured out and divided up in your mind, so there's never a question anymore about any of these. This James here in Acts chapter 12 is said to be James, the brother of John, and he is the one that gave his life, and we have the details recorded. Now, about the time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with a sword. Because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. So it appears that James, our subject of our lesson today, and Peter, Simon Peter, were key leaders in the church in Jerusalem during those very days of infancy. And Herod took James and had him killed. This Herod was the brother of Herodias. And we already know some things about Herodias. Herodias was the one that despised and hated John the Baptist, and she orchestrated John the Baptist's death. So this is her brother. What a family. What a family. He took James and had him killed by the sword. If you trace historical records, the year would have been 44 AD. So somebody tell me the approximate year that Jesus gave his life on Calvary. Who said that? Oh, yeah, that's the year we acknowledge that Jesus gave his life in around 33 AD. That's pretty accurate. So we know that the church had only been around for a short time. And in 44 AD, James was slain by the sword. In fact, he was the first of the apostles to have died. Now, we have a previous martyr. What was his name? We looked at him. Stephen died in Acts chapter 6. But the first apostle that gave his life, of course, Judas took his own life before Jesus was crucified. But the first apostle to die was James, the subject of our lesson today. So he did drink of that cup that Jesus talked about, and we can take great encouragement to know that something changed in the life of James from the time that he came with these false notions that he wanted to be the vice president of the organization in this coming kingdom, political kingdom, that's going to overthrow Roman tyranny. Whatever false impressions he had about things would be dispelled, and he ultimately did exactly as Jesus said he would. He would drink of that cup. And so when he said, we can, we know he did. He did take of that cup and suffered and died a cruel death. The apostles died in different ways, but when it says that James was killed with a sword, it's very likely that he was beheaded. So it was a very brutal way to die, and we take great encouragement. Emiliano, would you be so gracious? I saw Emiliano. He's in here somewhere. Oh, right in front of me. Emiliano, would you help me out? Thank you, sir. You're looking really sharp today, by the way. You strike me as a Todd Marinovich kind of a guy. I have so much fun with Emiliano during the week at school. I'm embarrassed to say we are, first of all, his dad is a miller, and he's my brother, so Emiliano is my adopted nephew. I call him my nephew, and sometimes he calls me Uncle Chuck, and I just kind of look at him, but I guess he figures, it's all fair in love and war, and Emiliano is my buddy. He's a great guy. He's a wonderful young man. I appreciate his help. We do have more facts on James than we do with some of the other apostles, some of which we've covered. We know more about his family than any of the other apostles. We know his father's name, his father's occupation. We know there was a joint business. We know his mother was involved, although we don't have her name. But in our text passage, we have some information about that gives us a picture of what she might have been like in personality. She was ambitious as well. Or maybe she just got so excited about what was happening, in the Lord's popularity that she just caught up in that wave of enthusiasm and excitement and looking at the future. But we know more about his family and his brother's family than we do any of the other apostles. He was given the name Son of Thunder by Jesus himself. The only other person to be given a nickname by Jesus himself was Simon Peter, who was called the Rock. First Simon and then Peter the Rock. But that name or that designation of Son of Thunder carries a little bit more weight in the sense that it was given by Jesus himself. And probably speaks a little bit about his personality. He's probably a fiery kind of guy. And that would appeal to me, certainly if I was traveling in a group of guys, to have somebody who had zeal and determination with their calling. Thirdly, he was a part of Jesus' inner circle. We've referred to that circle before. I think last week or the week before, I referred to 3 settings where those specific apostles, Peter, James, and John, were mentioned in separate settings. But there's another one listed today that I didn't give to you off the top of my head. We knew about the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus took the 3 beyond to pray for him. They witnessed the transfiguration and they raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. They were also present, according to Luke chapter 5, verse 10, when there was a great draft of fishes caught. So that inner circle of 3 of the 12 apostles were there on special occasions, of which James was one of those 3. He was also one of the first chosen apostles, according to Luke chapter 6, verse number 14. I already mentioned he was the first of the original 12 apostles to die. Herod launched a persecution against the church and all of its leaders. And Peter was in prison, was miraculously released. Remember that when he was released and he knocked at the door and they said, it's his ghost. They thought he had been killed too. The reason they thought it was his ghost knocking at the door was because they knew that James had already died by the sword, and they assumed that Herod would have already killed Peter as well, but he was miraculously released. He sought to follow the example of Elijah in bringing down fire from heaven. That reference, by the way, is in 2 Kings chapter 1. And Jesus, of course, rebuked James for that request, but it tells you something about his personality. Again, I hope we've taken a moment and asked ourselves, what would I have thought if Jesus gave us instructions to go and prepare lodging for him in this Samaritan village, and they rejected us simply because we were Jews and we were heading toward Jerusalem? We had ties and connections with the city of Jerusalem, and they denied us basic provisions for that reason and that reason alone. Unless you have been the target of prejudice, you may not understand how that feels to you. And if you have been the target of prejudice, you can identify with his feelings of animosity. Fire from heaven seems a little extreme, but maybe he spoke what we sometimes think in our hearts and never say about our feelings to those who would despise us for reasons of race and culture and so forth. He came with his brother to make a special request of Jesus. We saw that in Mark's gospel. They wanted a special place of position in heaven. And 14 years after that request, James would come to realize that Jesus had told him. We read that in Acts chapter 12. So it was a short time later. The other deaths recorded in history are not substantiated by the Bible, but the death of James is. We know exactly how he died and why he died in Acts chapter 12. So interesting fellow. We're going to finish up on our apostles and our series of apostles. I would just make one more closing comment for those of us who are raising children. And I was a little guilty of this. I grew up in a sports-minded home, and I always and still have an active interest in sports generally. And I had a son. God just gave me one son, and he was naturally athletic. But I had this notion on his 16th birthday that we would go out and play basketball. And one of my life goals was to beat my son in basketball on his 16th birthday. How was I to know he would be 3 or 4 inches taller than me and much more skilled than I was? So what I didn't have in talent, I made up for in physicality. And what was to be a wonderful memory for us growing up, I think Luke managed to get through it without too many emotional scars. But we were going at it in the driveway. We were going at it. And that would be a clear example of a Marv Marinovich moment, I think, in my life, being unrealistic. I should have been encouraging him, and I should have told him, Luke, I'm so proud of you that you could whip your dad on your 16th birthday in basketball. Instead, I was more concerned with making sure that I beat him. And that didn't end well. I remember Luke came in the house first. We didn't finish the game, by the way. It got so tense out there. You never guessed that from Luke's personality, but it got tense. It got tense out there, and he came in the house, and when I walked in a little bit later carrying the basketball, my wife said, what are you doing out there? Like, what are you doing out there? And, that caused your son to come in, and nice 16th birthday party from my son. But Luke, we've mended from that, have we not? It wasn't my fault the guy, passed by me in the 9th grade, in sports. But I would just share that transparent story to those of you who are expecting too much out of your children. We're all different. Everybody's different. And sometimes we shouldn't try to relive our lives through our children. Amen? Now you're preaching to me. So there you go. Father, we thank you.